This month marks the 1 year anniversary for the presidency of Joe Biden. Last week, he conducted a 2 hour press conference where he highlighted the successes and challenges of the last year. The response was swift and, in some circles, brutally critical. Pundits have and continue to debate, has Biden's first year been a boom or bust? My experts have receipts, all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
From the American Rescue Plan, the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill, the most diverse administration in the history of any president, the appointment of diverse federal judges, high vaccination rates for COVID-19, record low unemployment rates, and even rising wages. Some Democrats are praising Biden's first year and say with more time, he will even get more done. However, Republicans point to inflation, high gas prices, the pull out of Afghanistan, skyrocketing home prices, supply chain disruptions, and long COVID testing lines as evidence of a failed presidency. These naysayers say Biden is unfit, and if they have it their way, he should be a one-termer. What does the evidence say about Biden's first year in office? Here for my leadoff discussion is Rose Khattar. She is the Director of Economic Policy at the Center for American Progress. And American Progress is out with a new report on Biden's first year and the economy. Good morning and welcome, Rose.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you guys just released this new economic report on Biden's first year. What does the report tell us? Because we know what the Republicans are saying about the first year. We know what Democrats are saying, but where is the hard evidence?
So when you take a look at our report, I think the one thing that stands out is that under President Biden, the economy has been booming. And our takeaway is that the boom has been historic and really much better than had been expected before Biden became president.
Okay, so those Dems that say this has been a boom of a year for Biden, according to your report, they're right.
Yes, and you can see that on a range of metrics. If you look at the labor market, as you mentioned early on, we've seen the unemployment rate decline significantly, and it's declined much faster than we had projected before the American Rescue Plan was passed. We've seen the biggest job gains in a given year occur under President Biden. We've seen the economy growing and growing bigger than it was pre-pandemic. And so on a range of different measures, whether it's the labor market or economic growth, we're seeing historic and unprecedented growth. And none of that was inevitable. That's very much directly attributable to the American Rescue Plan, things like the stimulus check, the expanded child tax credit. But of course, part of that has to be attributed to the vaccine program as well.
So how do we juxtapose, Rose, that rosy picture that you just painted, which you said there's evidence to support a really growing economy, with what we know is the reality for so many Americans when they go to the gas station, when they go to the grocery store, when they go out to try to buy a home, everything seems to be so much higher.
Yeah, so I think there is no denying that everyday Americans are facing challenges. I think one thing to note is that these challenges aren't unique to this year or to this pandemic. For decades, Americans have had struggles buying things like housing, being able to afford childcare. Wages have been stagnant for so long. So I just think the pandemic has shown us a lot of these vulnerabilities in people's everyday lives and their financial security. But this isn't a new issue. This is a long-standing issue. And I think a lot of things that the president has discussed that could be passed over the next 12 months would be very helpful at dealing with these long-term cost issues.
So this notion or this concept of inflation, that we're in this inflationary period and that this is a period that we haven't been in decades, is that real? I mean, are we in an inflationary period, and is it a historic period?
Yeah, so there definitely is no denying that we're dealing with record high inflation, but we need to think about what encompasses these headline inflation figures. These don't necessarily account for the fact that childcare has been expensive for so long, or the fact that pre-K costs the average family over $8,000 a year. So these are just different types of costs that Americans have been dealing with for a long time. Inflation is a very important issue. And I think the president has taken a lot of measures to deal with a lot of the supply chain bottlenecks that have really contributed to the high prices we're seeing today. I just think one of the main points we should take away over the last 12 months is that high prices and families struggling with cost of living pressures is not just a pandemic related issue. It's been occurring for a very long time.
Is there anything in your study, Rose, that forecasts when we'll see kind of a normalizing of some of these prices? Because I can't imagine gas prices being any higher. I live in California and they're already close to $5. Gas prices are close to $5 a gallon. Should we expect to see those prices continue to rise, particularly as we're looking at this, potential conflict that's happening between Russia and the Ukraine? Will that have any impact on gas prices?
So economists have predicted that this year we should see lower inflation compared to what we've been seeing in 2021. I think a lot of what happens with the economy and with inflation specifically is going to be related to the course of the pandemic, because a lot of the issues that we've seen around inflation have really been caused by the pandemic. So I think the biggest thing we can do now is get vaccinated, make sure if we know people who aren't vaccinated, take them to get vaccinated, because the course of the economy is so directly linked to the course of the pandemic.
Okay, so not what's happening in terms of international affairs, no impact on the American economy. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, international factors definitely will impact prices. The way I tend to look at it is about the supply chain. We rely on a lot of goods coming from overseas. So, for example, if China has a lockdown, COVID related, that's going to impact supply in the US and that's going to impact prices. But to me, that still goes back to dealing with the pandemic and reminding everyone that the pandemic is not just a US issue, it's a global issue. And that's why we've also seen European countries and countries around the world that are very comparable to the US dealing with high inflation as well. They're also just experiencing different periods of growth, whereas the States is having high inflation, but we're also seeing very strong economic growth.
So, given this rosy picture that you paint around the economy, and given that your findings are that this is a record year for Biden in terms of the economy, job growth, wages growing, record low unemployment, why do you think that message isn't resonating with the American people? I don't hear people walking around saying, "I feel like we're in this really robust economy, like the economy's really doing great." That doesn't seem to be the sentiment. The sentiment seems to be the opposite, like, oh my God, everything is so high.
I think it's two parts. I think one, we can't forget that we're about to enter our third year of the pandemic, and that is stressful. And it's very hard for people to think that things are going well when things aren't back to normal and when we're still living in a pandemic. I think the second thing is inflation has caused issues on a day-to-day level. So like you said, you go to the grocery store, you fill up your gas, you're seeing higher prices, and that's different to what you've been experiencing in the past. So I think those two factors are playing a role in our psyche as to like how we see the economy going, or at least how we feel.
You said the economic predictions are, though, that in 2022, we should start to see prices coming down.
So the predictions are that we should see inflation slowing, and I think at this point, there doesn't seem to be indication that that shouldn't happen. But again, it's subject to the course of the pandemic and the uncertainty around the next 12 months and how we go with the pandemic.
And so when you say inflation coming down, does that translate into lower gas prices, lower grocery prices? Will that translate in that way?
You would like to think so. And we have been seeing, gas prices going down over the last couple of months. I mean, it's been up and down over different periods of time, but I think we can expect that.
And what about, I know unemployment is at a record low, but because of the Omicron variant, there are some businesses that are experiencing, lots of disruption in their workforce. People who have COVID are, out at record numbers. There's some airlines that have, we know had to really shutter thousands and thousands of flights. Lots of other businesses have had to close. Are there any predictions as to when we'll see some, again, kind of stabilization in those labor markets?
So definitely, I think December, January is going to be a difficult time for workers and for employers. Hopefully, as we, pass the peak of Omicron, we should start to see people being able to go back to work and being able to go back to work in a safe way. I think one thing to note is that there is a deficit of people having access to paid leave and paid sick leave, so that we didn't have to necessarily see people dropping out of work over this period of time. If they had access to paid leave, they'd still be able to, be employed, but be able to take time away from work and still get an income. So I think one thing that the pandemic has really showcased has been that we need paid leave, and there is a bill in Congress today that could be passed to give people access to paid family and medical leave.
Wow. Okay, Rose, how does your report get disseminated to the American people? I mean, and get beyond just economists and, other professionals?
So it's like things like today, coming on your show and talking to people and being able to explain to them how the economy is going, but also noting that people's everyday experiences may not relate to these aggregate statistics about jobs and unemployment. And we want to try and bring down some of those figures into touching to people's everyday lives as well.
Well, thank you so much, Rose, for one, your organization, doing the research and creating this report, writing this report, but also sharing it with the American people, because I think sometimes we get so overwhelmed with the negative news about inflation and high prices that we lose sight of what you just shared, or what this report establishes in terms of how robust this economy is doing and how great a job the Biden administration has done in its first year. So thank you for giving us that perspective and for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, my next guest, Dr. Kristen Broady. She's a fellow at Brookings Institution, and she's here with one of her colleagues, Bill Galston, who is a senior fellow at Brookings Institution. Good morning, Dr. Broady and Bill. So we heard Rose say that the economy is doing well. The unemployment numbers are at record lows. Wages are rising, but I see you with a side eye, Dr. Broady. What's that side eye?
I'm like, I wonder if I could turn my head any further. So I appreciate the report, and I am a fan, but I want to start with the fact that the consumer price index for all urban consumers increased 6.2%. I like the specific numbers, okay, between October 2020 and October 2021 before seasonal adjustment. Between September and October 2021, the CPIU increased by 0.9%. During that same time, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, average hourly earnings for all employees increased by 0.4% during that time. So what does that mean? So when you
that was a lot of technical stuff. Break it down for us.
So when you take inflation into account, real average hourly wages earnings decreased by 0.5% in October. So that's not overall, that's just that one point in time. The second thing that I want to say is that yes, the economy is doing well, and yes, the unemployment rate has come down to 3.9% in December, but it's not so good for everybody. So for Black women, between November and December, the unemployment rate went from 4.9% up to 6.2%. For Black men, 7.2% down to 7%. Good that it's coming down, but still very high. And for Black teens, 16 to 19, 22% down to 21%. So if we're talking about things going well, let's talk about how it's going for everybody.
Well, great that you point out those differences in terms of how Black folks are faring in this robust economy versus others. What is the reasoning for why that Black unemployment rate amongst women, men, and teens varies dramatically from the overall unemployment rate?
There are a couple of different reasons. You have to look at the jobs that people are concentrated in. Black women and Hispanic women were concentrated in jobs that were called and are essential. But those jobs had more fluctuation. So cashiers, grocery store workers, administrative assistants, caretakers of elderly people and children. So when places shut down and reopened, those are not jobs that can be done remotely. Mm-hmm. So you would see swings there. Mm-hmm. And we know that the Black unemployment rate has been the highest on average since they started tracking by race back in the early 70s.
Bill, from your perspective, let's give your grade for Biden in terms of this first year. So Rose's report says that he did a bang up job. Dr. Broady just gave us a taste of reality about how that, report should be looked at, it, particularly, when we think about African Americans. What's your assessment of where we are and how Biden has done with the economy?
Well, very simply, Biden has made substantial progress on the economic problems that he inherited. But in the process, he's generated a big new problem for himself. That big new problem is inflation, which in survey after survey emerges as the principal economic concern of Americans, regardless of walk of life and regardless of race. People walk into the grocery stores these days and they're shocked. Beef prices are up 12% from this time last year. The prices of basics are up across the board. I monitor the big food companies, and they've announced that in the first 6 months of this year, they're going to raise food prices another 5%. And people feel that. And here's the key statistic for me. When you look at average wages for workers corrected for inflation, they have fallen by 2.4 percentage points in the past 12 months. And people notice that. So, yeah, it's great that 6.5 million people who didn't have jobs a year ago have them now. But in the meantime, about 200 million people are feeling the effects of inflation. And that's why the president's approval on his handling of the economy has plunged in the past few months.
But is it fair, Bill, to blame Biden for inflation, given that we're in this pandemic, given that American Rescue Plan was needed to stimulate the economy, to make sure that people had a safety net when we were being ravaged by the, COVID-19?
If that question is to me, then I'll give the first answer, but I have a feeling that Kristen would probably say the same thing, but we'll find out. At the time the American Rescue Plan was passed, and continuing ever since, there has been a debate as to whether it was the right size or too large. And the people who said that it was too large said that it would accelerate inflation. And as I read the situation, they've turned out to be correct. And the people who said that all of it was necessary have turned out to be not so correct. So, I don't mean to be critical of the administration, but these are facts.
No, and you are entitled to your opinion, and it's a very informed and very educated opinion. What do you think, Dr. Broady? There was a sense when the American Rescue Plan was passed that it was exactly what the country needed at that time, because people were suffering, businesses were closed, people, weren't able to pay their rent, they weren't able to have access to food, so basic necessities were scarce for a lot of communities, and that American Rescue Plan put money in the pockets of people that very much needed it.
So I have a couple of thoughts. I think that the president has done an amazing job with the circumstance that he inherited. I think that things could have been worse if someone else, I won't say who, had won, right? So that's number one, that we needed the eviction moratorium. We needed the child tax credit. I feel like I'm a little bit biased because I've not struggled, right? I work at the Brookings Institution. I teach at Spelman. I didn't need an eviction moratorium. I don't have children. I didn't need the child tax credit. So it's hard for me to say what American people who did struggle needed. I don't feel comfortable saying what they needed or not. I do know that we have inflation now. Some of that has been because of supply constraints. Some of it may have been because of the stimulus, and some of it is because of the states. You have to look at what red states versus blue states did with that money and who it went to. If it went to anybody, right? Like all states did not distribute the money fairly, equally, or at all, right? So I think we need to not just look at President Biden, but we need to look at how states and counties and municipalities distributed those funds and what people did with it, and not just blame the president.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would just say one thing. A lot of people got benefits who didn't need them. And as a result, they have accumulated $2 trillion of additional savings. These are Federal Reserve Board reports, not my invention. And they're now spending those savings at a very high rate, which is making the supply problem worse.
Well, who are those people, Bill? I always get, suspicious when they talk about people who got money that they didn't deserve, because it's always kind of coded language, particularly for, poor people and middle class. Who are these people that got this money? Are you talking about big companies that cheated the government and got those PPP loans when they shouldn't have gotten it? Or who are the people you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about people like Kristen and me. I'm
didn't get any money, by the way, but go on.
Yeah, but
what money did you and Kristen, or someone like Kristen, because Kristen didn't get any?
Well, look, if you suppose you're an upper income family making $250,000 a year, you got the full child tax credit of $3,600 per child under the age of 5. Now, I think there's a serious question here. Should people? So I'm not talking about poor people or working class people who didn't deserve it. I'm talking about upper middle class and wealthy people who didn't need it, but they got it anyway. And I think that's a serious issue.
We can obviously debate, what percentage of those people got it versus, people who actually did need it, who are now feeling the pinch because it's been taken away from them. But I want to move on to Afghanistan, because we know that Biden's approval numbers in this first year, despite that rosy report that Rose told us about, it is, his numbers have been lagging and falling. And a lot of it has to do with the economy and economists debating the state of the economy. And another issue, Dr. Broady, is Afghanistan and the pullout from Afghanistan. One of his promises was that he was going to end that war. And he got a lot of praise for ending it, but he also got a lot of critique for the way that it was done. How significant do you think the handling of Afghanistan is weighing on Biden's approval numbers?
So I think it's hard to say. I'll say a couple of things. A couple of presidential candidates said or promised that they would withdraw. So I think the American people thought that was a good idea, to not have troops all over the world and endless wars that are costing billions and trillions of dollars. But again, the handling of it, seeing the people hanging off of airplanes, it was terrible. Not just the look of it, but the way that it actually happened. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I wonder what a better job would have looked like, right? Because it's not just on the American military side. We know that the British had soldiers there, the Germans, the French, etc. And I think just dealing with a place that had the situation that it was. I don't want to go too far into foreign affairs, but I guess I wonder what else could have been done considering the circumstance. I'm not saying nothing else could have been done, but we have to consider who the people are, who the Taliban is. Like, what was the better way to do that? I'm not saying there isn't one. I just don't know what it could have been.
Right. No, absolutely. And what about voting rights, Bill? We know that voting rights legislation, a big part of Biden administration's, commitment to making voting accessible to, all Americans, passing federal voting rights legislation, didn't happen. As hard as he tried, and some activists say didn't try hard enough. Do you think it's fair that Biden is getting blamed for the failure of the Senate to pass voting rights legislation?
No, I don't. But the activists do have a point. He waited a very long time to ratchet up the temperature. And if he had tried and failed last summer, I don't think people would be so annoyed with him. But the perception among the advocates of voting rights reform and protection is that he put a whole bunch of stuff ahead of voting rights. And that by the time he got around to, delivering a big speech, going down to Georgia, drawing lines, it was really too late. A lot of momentum had been lost. I am not sure that the vote outcome would have been different if he had tried 9 months ago, but the perceptions would have been different.
Yeah, clearly it doesn't look like anything would have changed, and maybe some people would have felt, that he leaned in harder if he had done it earlier. But I query, Dr. Broady, the critique of this first year because it is the first year, and it seems like Biden is being judged for, an entire presidency, and he got something done, which no one thought he could get done, which was this bipartisan infrastructure bill which infrastructure week was happening every day with the last administration, but yet it never happened. So, do you think Biden is being unfairly judged by some of these things, whether it's Afghanistan, voting rights, the failure to get that passed, or inflation? Should we be thinking about this glass as half full rather than half empty?
I would look at what Stacey Abrams did in Georgia. I'll just say that. I would look at Angela Rye and others that have been marching and doing things. And I agree with Bill that this has been an issue forever. And it should have been the thing that he started talking about on day one, because all of these other things would be made easier if people had the right to vote. But yes, I understand there has been this criticism of the two senators who people think are voting in the wrong way, but we have a whole Republican Party, right? So if people have the right to vote, I'm not saying that they'll vote for Democrats or Republicans, but they'll vote for the people that suit them, that have their best interests at heart.
Yeah.
So without voting rights, what else do we have? So I think that should have been his focus from the beginning. The second thing I'll say is that the other person has been having rallies, has been on all kinds of TV and touting their message. And I think that the president should do more to promote the things that he has done to help the American people and will continue to do.
Yeah, is it just knee-jerk reaction, Bill? Everybody's come down hard on Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin for their votes. The Arizona Democratic Party has now censored Kristen Sinema. But there doesn't seem to be any focus on the Republicans. You brought them up, Dr. Broady. This is a Congress and a Senate that consists of two parties, and voting rights isn't a Democratic issue. Voting rights isn't a Black issue. It's not a Georgia issue. It's an American issue. Why isn't there more focus on the Republicans, who I think Biden aptly said during his press conference, what do they stand for? It's easy to stand back and throw darts and critique the guy that's doing something, even if he's not doing it the way you want it to be done. But what about the party that is refusing to take action on anything?
Before Bill answers, I like the way you said two parties, not two people.
Yeah, no, it's a two-party system. So what about, Bill, what is it in our body politic that causes us to just give a pass, seemingly, to the Republican Party that's blocking everything that Biden is attempting to do?
That is a very good question, Areva, from your lips to God's ears, because, I'm an old man, and I remember with great excitement the passage of the original Voting Rights Act in 1965. I am plenty old enough to remember that it was reauthorized multiple times with bipartisan support. And so there was a time when what you said, it's not a Republican or a Democratic issue, it's an American issue. That was true. That wasn't just an aspirational statement. That was a statement of fact, but it's not true anymore. And it would take a lot more time than we have to explain how we moved from where we used to be to where we are now, but we are where we are. And I think that underscoring the point, repeating it over and over again until it sinks in, that on voting rights and most other things, it takes two to tango, and there's only one dancer on the floor right now. I think that is entirely fair and long overdue.
Yeah. So, Dr. Broady, we're going into year 2, and we're facing midterms this year. And there's already talk about 2024. We know that there's news this morning that Justice Stephen Breyer is going to retire. We know that Biden, a part of his campaign promises was that he wanted to see the first Black woman appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And there was some question about whether he would get an appointment, 1, 2, or maybe 0. But it looks like he's going to get one appointment, at least one. Are you hopeful for year two? And what do you think? The question they kept asking Biden at the press conference last week was, what are you going to do to reset? How do you reset? And his answer was pretty much, I'm not resetting. I like this team. I'm going forward with this team. Do you think the president needs a reset?
So I think I am encouraged by the possibility of a Supreme Court appointment. And I say possibility because we know that the other side has a tendency to block people. We see what's happening right now with the attacks on Biden's pick of Lisa Cook. So I'm hopeful that he will appoint a Black woman. I'm hopeful that that person will actually make it onto the court. I'm hopeful that whoever he picks will not get blocked. I just think that he and his administration and his supporters need to get out into the cities and into the states and in front of people to promote the work that he has done. Again, like I said, the other side is out there having rallies and parties and, on the golf course and everywhere else. So the Democrats have been doing a great job. The administration has done a lot of great things. They need to promote it before it's too late.
What about you, Bill? And I agree with you, Dr. Broady. Sometimes it's the message and it's always the messenger. And Biden himself in that press conference said one of his failures was that he had not been out touting his record enough, and he wanted to get back into the communities and doing that. But Bill, do you think it's time for a reset?
I do. That doesn't mean firing people, but it does mean learning from mistakes and doing better in year two. I don't think President Biden, in his private moments would say that everything has gone right. There have been miscalculations. He's participated in some of those miscalculations, and it just makes common sense, to reflect on your experience after a year and ask yourself whether anything needs to be changed. And, I have a long list of things that could change. I don't think we have time for that now. But I don't think it means firing your chief of staff. I will say one other thing, and that is I worked for President Bill Clinton, whose party was crushed in the midterm elections. And the president had to give a press conference saying, and I quote, "I'm still relevant," which was pretty pathetic. And just, 18 months later, he won a big victory for his reelection. Ronald Reagan was down at 35% job approval at the beginning of his third year. And he won a great landslide victory over the guy I worked for, Walter Mondale, beat him by 18 points. So anybody who takes a snapshot now and says, this is President Biden's future and fate is making a very big mistake.
Those are really just incredibly, I think, encouraging words, Bill. Thank you for your historical knowledge there and sharing that historical knowledge with us and reminding us that this is just a snapshot. This is 1 year in, and so many things can change over the next couple of years, even couple of months as we head into those midterms. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Dr. Broady. Always a pleasure to sit down with both of you. And just for the record, Dr. Broady, Tom Hanks is out with a commercial now touting Biden's accomplishments. So he's pulling in Hollywood and he's pulling in some friends to help him get the word out. I think that's a good start, and maybe that's a part of the reset that Bill is talking about. One thing Biden was clear on, though, which is I was so happy to hear him say, was that, in 2024, look for a Biden-Harris ticket. He was emphatic about that. So that was good news to many of us who have been loyal supporters of the vice president. Again, thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Dr. Broady, for joining me. All right. Our next guest is Alice Stewart. She's a Republican political strategist and a CNN political analyst, a friend, and always a pleasure to have you on the show. Good morning, Alice.
Hi, Areva. Great to be here.
Yeah, let's start with this breaking news that Justice Breyer is going to retire and what that means for the Biden administration and its first appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court. One, I'll ask you, were you surprised to hear this news?
I was surprised, but I'll say this, it's a great shot in the arm for the Biden administration. And I think, look, Supreme Court nominees and appointments are critical. These are not 4-year terms or 6-year terms like members of Congress. These are lifetime appointments, and they are so valuable to the president and the party who wants someone on the court that is a strict adherence to the Constitution, but also has some sort of understanding of the values that they support. And look, I think Republicans have done a very good job of focusing on judicial appointments and the Supreme Court. That, in my view, is one of the former president's biggest legacies, is the appointment to the Supreme Court. And this will be a huge help to the Biden administration. And your previous guest had suggested whether or not this will be stopped by the Republicans. Unfortunately, there's nothing they can do. It's a 50+1 vote by the Senate. And what is different here, as in past, we have a Democrat in the House, in the Senate, and in the White House. They have full control in Washington. And they do have the authority and power to not just nominate a Supreme Court nominee, but to affirm that person. So this is good news for them. And as to exactly why he chose this time, I'm anxious to hear about this. But there's going to be a full court press by Republicans to try and stop this. But the reality is, Areva, there's nothing they can do, and this is a positive sign for Democrats. And to be quite honest, Areva, Republicans have done this for many years, using judicial appointments and Supreme Court as a wedge issue to galvanize their supporters and galvanize voters. This will be a big bonus for Democrats in the midterm elections, I see.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks to Mitch McConnell, it's only 50+1, and we have 50+1, and I can't imagine any defections on the Democratic side. So I'm looking forward to it. Biden said throughout his presidential campaign that, once elected, if elected, he wanted to see a Black woman, the first Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. So we may be looking at a historic nomination with this opportunity for Biden to replace Justice Breyer. Now, it won't shift the balance of the court. We're going to still be the 6-3 majority, because as you talked about your former president's legacy, we should talk about the steal of one of those spots by Mitch McConnell when Obama was still in office. But this is big news for the party. I agree with you, can be a galvanizing force heading into those midterms, particularly if an African-American woman, and there's so many qualified African-American women that can be, can fill that vacancy. So super exciting news. They're going to be talking about it obviously all day, and we'll get more about the reasoning that Justice Breyer is making this decision. I want to bring into the conversation now Richard Greene. He's a political communications strategist. He's the author of Words That Shook the World. He's also a returning guest to the special report. Good morning, Richard, and thanks for joining us again.
You're welcome. And this is very exciting news, and I completely agree. I actually know Justice Breyer a little bit. I interviewed him. I played tennis with his son. He's an incredibly brilliant, dedicated guy. And I think that he looked at the chances of losing the majority and said, we can't take that risk. I was hoping he would wait until the actual election, because the truth is we could pick up 1 or 2 more progressives in the Senate, and that would be an even better time for him to retire.
Yeah, obviously timing is everything, but we'll take it, Richard, particularly given what we're talking about today, and that's Biden's first year, and how differently people see that first year based on their, political persuasion and their worldview. So that 2-hour press conference last week, some folks walked away, said, he showed strength. He, laid out what his successes were. He even talked some about his challenges. But if you turned on certain news stations, you would have thought that this guy was the worst president ever, 10 times worse than the last guy that occupied the White House. So let's talk about messaging and why there's such divergent views on how well this presidency has gone over the last year. Let's start with you, Richard. What grade would you give Biden in his first year?
First of all, I have to say it is physically, scientifically impossible to be 10 times worse than the last guy. That's just not even in the realm of reality. Yeah. I would give Joe Biden a C- and an A. Okay. And that's what's confusing, Because, for example, I went to the funeral of Harry Reid, who was a friend and one of the most amazing human beings. We're going to appreciate him over the course of history. I mean, this was a unique American. We're never going to see anyone like him. And I was sitting next to a Nevada state legislator who said that he was fierce and amazingly kind, right? So that dichotomy. And Joe Biden is weak and extraordinarily effective. So,
what do you mean weak, Richard? What do you mean weak?
Oh, he's incredibly weak in terms of his persona. What people...
Oh, I don't agree with you. What do you mean? What's this kind of male bravado? Like, what do you have to be a strong man? You got to be like beating your chest and screaming?
Listen, 63% of Republicans approve of Vladimir Putin. They think he's a stronger leader than Joe Biden. There are people in this country who want somebody who is macho, who is strong. Joe Biden, the way he walks, the way he stutters, the way he fumbles, the way he makes certain mistakes, he's not young. He was stronger when he was young. I'm just telling, listen, I love Joe Biden. I would vote for him anytime.
That's like playing into every stereotype
you asked my opinion.
Playing into every stereotype about what a strong man should be. Jump in here, Alice. I know you have some strong thoughts about what weak and strong should look like.
Look, I tend to look at presidents through the political lens, and whether they're weak or macho or a stud or whatever you want to call it, I tend to look at it more from the policy lens. And I think his policies are bad for the country. And I think that is what people need to be looking at our president for. And in terms of a grade, I would give him probably a D-, because you have to look at this now. We're looking at this presidency from...
Let me stop you first, Alice, and let's talk about these policies that you think are so bad for the country. Then I want to ask Richard, is he agreeing that these are bad policies?
Okay, well, look, he came into office, Areva, right, saying that he was going to restore the soul of America. He was going to unify the country. He was going to put COVID in the rearview mirror. He has divided the country with regard to his rhetoric. I was encouraged.
He's divided the country. What has he done to divide the country?
Okay, I'll explain. When he went to Georgia to advocate for the federalizing of the elections, he called his opponents akin to George Wallace, Jefferson Davis, and said they were domestic enemies. That is not a good way to get people on board with your policies. And look, his mandate going into the White House, as I said, was unity and putting an end to COVID, because he promised that to the American people. Now that he's been in office, he truly has been persuaded by the progressives to make his mandate about social spending and federalizing the election or voting rights. That's not what he was put into office for. And that's why people are frustrated. That's why we're seeing approval numbers around 41%. And it's not just Republicans.
Well, Alice, let me say this. I'm going to let Richard jump in. I beg to differ in terms of why we put him in office. African Americans who were overwhelmingly, voted for Joe Biden, put him in office to address voting rights. So you're dismissing a whole swath of the American voting population when you say that's not why we put him in office. We absolutely wanted him to address federal voting rights legislation. Go ahead, Richard. I see you shaking your head. Are you going to, what's your response to Alice?
Are you kidding me, Alice? I mean, seriously, bring the country together, unity. How many Republicans have spent even 1 ounce of energy to support anything that Joe Biden has done? This works both ways. What's he supposed to do? Mitch McConnell literally at the beginning of his term said, I am 100% committed to stopping everything Joe Biden wants to do. Alice, you tell me how you work with somebody like that.
You first of all, you pick up the phone and you call them. This big issue that is so instrumental to this administration, voting rights, he could have, low-hanging fruit on that issue on our side was Senator Mitt Romney. Romney says he never was approached by the president or the Democrats. So you cannot blame the Republicans if the president is not willing to.
Okay, Alice, wait a minute. Alice,
hold on. I have to respond to that.
Let's talk about Romney in that statement. Is he a 12-year-old kid or a Harvard-trained lawyer, U.S. senator? Nobody called called me and invited me to the party. Give me a break, Mitt Romney. You have a responsibility as a senator. You represent the country. Obviously, you're a senator from a particular state, but you can weigh in on voting rights. You had every opportunity to weigh in and to voice your opinion. And you didn't need, and first of all, Jim Clyburn said that's a flat out lie, that Democrats did reach out to him. So let's put that aside. But beyond that, when I heard that statement, I wanted to like smack him. Like, dude, really? You're a grown ass man. Let's be clear here. You have an obligation to this country. And because somebody didn't call you, you're going to say that's why you didn't participate in the most consequential piece of legislation for this country, like voting rights?
But this was not Mitt Romney's issue to get passed. This was President Biden and the Democrats' issue to get passed. And when you want something that bad, you pull out all the stops and you make all the calls. You cannot criticize Mitt Romney for not trying to get past legislation that he did not campaign on and didn't get elected on. So that it's really disingenuous to put the blame on Mitt Romney, but that's not what he
voting rights,
on.
Alice, is an American issue. It's not a Democratic issue. All of us benefit when everyone has access to the ballot.
It is.
Alice, it's not an American issue? Seriously?
I didn't say that. Well,
you kind of did.
Oh, I kind of did not. So I would appreciate if you didn't put words in my mouth. What I did say.
What she said was it was a Democratic issue that Biden campaigned on. That's what she said, Richard. But go ahead.
What I said, if I can say what I said,
absolutely,
this was an issue that the Democrats campaigned on and Joe Biden campaigned on. What I do believe, having been Deputy Secretary of State in Arkansas and overseeing elections are run by the state and should be legislated by the states. We should not federalize our elections. That is an important aspect that Republicans have supported for many, many years. And that's the key takeaway is that you look at these presidential elections and elections across the country, they are run state by state. There are checks and balances from the ballot box.
There is a federal role in
certified.
ensuring that every American has equal access to voting in this country. Come on.
And Alice, you have to admit that for years, the Republicans reauthorized the federal civil rights voting legislation. So it wasn't until recently that Republicans took on this position that somehow voting rights, was not under the purview of the feds. So that argument, you talk about being disingenuous, Alice, that's a disingenuous argument by Republicans who have voted consistently in the past to reauthorize the federal civil rights voting legislation. But let's move on from voting, because I want to go back to you, Richard. You said you did give Biden that C about, being weak, which I disagree with. But you gave him an A. Let's talk about that A. What was the A for?
So I want to defend myself on what I said about, buying into these old stereotypes. Listen, he does not look or feel like a strong leader, partly because of his age. This is just a fact. This is perception that is shared by a lot of people. Every single Republican I know said, oh, he can't even put together a sentence. He's not even running the country, right? So he's not strong in that way. And that hurts. I literally spoke to a 16-year-old kid whose mom was a progressive Democrat who was really attracted to the Republicans because he felt that they were more masculine. That's a thing. It's not my thing, but it's a thing.
Richard,
but he's been incredibly effective.
Richard, some of these same people complain that Kamala Harris, who is as vibrant and strong as anyone can be, and who's not old, who's not feeble in any sense of the imagination, she smiles too much. She laughs too much. So some of these same people are going to complain no matter what your body image is or how you project yourself. So I don't know. We shouldn't even talk about them. I want to talk about your age.
But it absolutely affects.
Let's talk about that.
Listen, he's passed. There are $1,400 in virtually every American's bank account because of Joe Biden. $1,400. I don't know about you, but to a lot of people, that's a lot of money, right? Right. We have an infrastructure bill that the former guy, I forgot his name, promised to pass every single week for 4 years. And Joe Biden did it easily in a bipartisan way in the first year. That helps the environment, that fixes bridges and roads and all sorts of other things. And that's just with enormous opposition, he was able to pull those two things together. And we are on the 2-yard line to get the most consequential legislation in decades He's doing a great job. There's very little more that he can do, but he is plagued by the perception that he is weak.
All right, Alice, what do you think about the infrastructure bill? Do you take issue with the bipartisan? Will you at least give Biden an A for getting infrastructure passed when your guy talked about it every day and could never get it passed?
If I can please first go on the record in agreement with you, anyone who criticizes this president for those all those things that were just mentioned, it's stupid and idiotic. Let me just say that. But bravo to this administration and the Democrats for getting infrastructure passed. It was infrastructure week just about every week during the previous administration, and it lasted about 5 minutes until President Trump tweeted about something ridiculous. But bravo for getting that done. And I think that is something he should tout and should be very proud of. The problem is, that is certainly something that was a great accomplishment. But on the heels of that, and talk about grading this administration, the first half, I think, of this first year was great. But as in baseball, you're typically remembered by your last game. And the last 6 months have not been stellar for this administration, starting with Afghanistan, and then with COVID testing problems, and then with inflation. And certainly the numbers we had that inflation is at its highest point in 40 years. These are not good numbers, and they certainly need to be turned around. That's why we're seeing, as I said, disapproval ratings or approval ratings near 40, and even with Democrats, only 76% in recent poll of Democrats approve of the job performance that Joe Biden is doing. The good news is that we're just in the first quarter. There are 4 quarters in this game, and he has the chance to turn this around. But what he needs to do, I think, more importantly, is put more of an emphasis on what's important to the American people, which is the economy and jobs, working on getting the food prices down, gas prices down, certainly adding more jobs in this economy. Those are the kind of things that the administration can and should be focusing on that will really boost his approval ratings, because people care about the kitchen table issues. And that's where a lot of focus, I think, could be better spent.
Yeah, I think, Alice, first of all, we do agree about that stupidity that's happening around, Biden's look or his walk. But let's talk about the economy. You're right. Gas prices are high. Grocery prices are high, but we just had an economist on that says this economy is incredibly robust, that we have the lowest employment rates than we've seen in years. Now, Dr. Broady pointed out that that's not true for African Americans, and we need to parse those numbers out and look specifically at Black unemployment rate, which is higher than white unemployment rates, and we need to do something about that, and I am on board with that 100%. But the economist said that wages are rising and the economy is robust, and economists are predicting that mid-year 2022, we're going to see those gas prices and food prices start to come down and stabilize. So, Richard, do you think it's fair that Biden is getting a low grade on the economy when the economy, to be honest, is a mixed bag? Yes, there's inflation, but yes, there's record low unemployment.
First of all, Biden did everything he could to lower gas prices by unleashing a whole bunch from the reserves, right? So that we could flood the market with some oil. Also, he's trying to push electric cars. Do you know how much I pay per gallon on my electric car, Alice? It's about the equivalent of $1.25. He wants to create an electric car infrastructure that will make us incredibly not dependent on oil for the rest of our country's life. So that's huge. Plus, inflation, there are supply chain issues that are related to the pandemic that are global. It's not Joe Biden's fault.
Yeah.
Bravo on your low price you pay for your gas, for your electric car, but I'm sure your electric vehicle costs a lot more than my gas guzzler, but that's another story.
Guess what? Under Build Back Better, electric cars would be competitive and even less costly than internal combustion cars. But the Republicans, every single Republican, voted against giving that option to the American people.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Build Back Better. Let's talk, Alice. One of the things Joe Biden said in that press conference last week, he kept saying over and over again, what are Republicans for? We know what they're against. They're against anything that will make Joe Biden a successful president. So any piece of legislation that's going to come across the desk of Mitch McConnell is pretty much DOA. He's made that really apparent in the same way he did with President Obama. So what is it that Republicans would get behind? Because, so far it doesn't look like there's anything that would move this country forward that, middle class and working class people care about that Republicans would support.
Great question. Look, Republicans are for getting a hold and handle on inflation, boosting jobs, public safety, and education. We saw a lot of these policies implemented in the Virginia governor's race, and Glenn Youngkin won because he focused on those issues. Look, the last thing we need when we're in an inflationary period like we are, and many economists, despite what we've heard, many that have spoken with you, the economy is not in a good spot. We will not be out of it by summer. This is not transitory. This is long-term. And we do have low, unemployment rate is low, but in large part because people are leaving the workforce. That is not good. But the last thing we need when we're in an inflationary period is more government spending, another $2 trillion spending of government money. Look, there are many components of Build Back Better that do have widespread support. I'm encouraged that President Biden said, let's break it apart. Let's find what we do agree on and pass it incrementally and do away with the idea of this transformational government spending. Because as I said, there are parts of that people can support, and Republicans would get behind breaking that up and passing some of those proposals.
Richard, I'm gonna let you have the last word, but I do want to say to Alice, I know your heart, I know you care about people. That Virginia governor, the first thing he has done, he's done a lot in the first 2 weeks of his administration. One of them is ban critical race theory in schools, which we know is a total red herring. That critical race theory, a legal concept that's taught in law schools, is not being taught in any Virginia public schools, and is dog whistle racism to prevent the teaching of real and factual history about this country, including slavery, including structural racism. And I cannot imagine that you would support making it impossible for school kids to learn about the true history of Blacks in this country. Go ahead, Richard, you respond, because I know Alice agrees with me on that. So Richard, respond to her comment about inflation.
Yeah, well, Alice, do you know why the Democrats had to put all of this stuff, the whole kitchen, everything in the kitchen sink, into one bill? Do you know why?
Please enlighten me.
I would love to continue to debate with you. This is fun.
Okay, just tell us why, Richard. Tell us why they had to put it all in one bill.
Because you get one chance per year to get something passed with 50 votes. And Mitch McConnell will filibuster every individual bill. So it's a useless venture. That's why. Have your buddy Mitch McConnell and the other 49 Senate Republicans come to the White House and say, here's what we are willing to not filibuster. Let's move forward on this, on pre-K, on childcare, on all of the things that you say you like. It's balls in your court. And by the way, Republican telephones also are capable, I think, of sending calls instead of just receiving them.
Good point. Well, we'll come back and we'll talk about the filibuster, which is an entirely different argument. But again, I do think, as I said, Republicans would support some components of Build Back Better. And if we can break it up and get it done, I'm all for it.
Well, we've got to end it there. The thing that I think we all agree on is that we may get the first African-American Supreme Court justice, female African-American Supreme Court justice. That would be incredibly galvanizing for Democrats, for African-American voters, for women. We'll get more representation on this Supreme Court. So I think that's a good way for us to end. As much as we disagree, we all agree that getting a new Supreme Court justice is a really good thing, not just for the Democrats, but for the country. Thank you, Alice. Always great to see you. Thank you, Richard. Always great.
And thank you, Joe Biden, for that.
And thank you, Joe Biden, for that. And thank you, Kamala Harris, as well. We know representation matters. And that's one of the things we didn't talk about with Joe Biden. The most diverse administration
Absolutely.
ever. The most
next time.
People of color, representation matters. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Areva.
Bye, Alice.
Bye,
Areva.
All right. Thanks to all of my guests this morning. Okay. Thanks to all of you who listened and followed the show. And I think if nothing else, I hope all of you got out of this how important it is to be knowledgeable about these issues. There's so much going on in the country. So many people have opinions about it, but you want to have your own opinion, and you get your own opinion, or you have your own opinion by listening to the experts and going deep and asking questions and challenging the information that you hear, because there's so much information that comes at all of us and it comes so quickly. And some of it is just junk, it's just plain, flat out wrong information. And to be a knowledgeable and informed voter, which you all should be, you've got to make sure you have good and accurate information. My words to live by: knowledge. Knowledge is power. And I want to make sure all of you are powerful. So continue to follow the special report. Weigh in. I keep bringing the best experts in the country on some of these really thorny issues. We're going to be following what happens with this appointment by Joe Biden. I hope he is true to his word, and I hope we have the first Black woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. It is long overdue. I'm out. Y'all be safe out there. Wear your mask, get your booster. Remember, we're all in this together.